So here's a question. When did scientific progress begin? Was it when the first humanoid apes, known as Australopithecus, diverged from chimpanzees and began walking the plains of Africa around 4 to 7 million years ago? Anatomical studies suggest that the hand of the Australopithecus was adapted to throw with precision and force, and likely played an important role in our evolution. So how about this as our introduction to science? Perhaps it's when the first stone tools appeared around 3.3 million years ago. Or maybe it was 2 million years ago when Australopithecus mastered fire and cooking, unleashing new nutrition in our food which swelled our brains and decreased the size of our gut, evolving us into Homo erectus. Today's video is about listening to science tell us its story so we can have a better foundation of where we feel it should go in the immediate future. This question helps it become clear that there's really no perfect answer as to when scientific progress began. Instead, science seems to be an innate and eternal feature of this universe, similar to the idea of the Logos, where John chapter 1 verses 1 states, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Science in this perspective isn't limited to the professionals working in lab coats, but rather, this science takes place whenever and wherever life describes to itself what happens. For example, the very first forms of life that developed on our planet nearly 3.5 billion years ago, called prokaryotes, existing for billions of years before plants and animals appeared, they understood that there are objective facts which define our world, and nature works according to these predefined scientific rules, similar to our scientists in the lab coats. Our primate ancestors understood this too, and had to deal with snakes in the trees where they and their young slept. Likewise, prokaryotes in their microbial mats had to find some source of energy other than the hydrothermal vents in the ocean. It's really amazing to consider that for an ancient amount of time, our relationship with science was originally a place of balance and harmony. For so long, growing in warm embrace with that which creates and moves life. Even with our scientific challenges coming, and for the ones here, there's still an amazing opportunity to find our way back to this warm embrace and create it anew. Our collective fate hinges on our ability to effectively define who we are in the 21st century, which we discuss in section 2, the consciousness shift. Because it's the key to renewing this embrace with the spirit of science which we'd preserved and relied upon for so long. But let's continue with our story of humanity and scientific progression. So grab onto something, because the story of our species takes an unexpected turn when we realize that a considerable amount of our history may have been erased in 2 key events within the last 100,000 years. In 1993, science journalist Ann Gibbons and a number of scientists since have supported her research suggesting that a population bottleneck occurred in human evolution around 75,000 years ago because of a supervolcano eruption at the site of present-day Lake Toba in Sumatra, Indonesia, followed immediately by a global volcanic winter of 6 to 10 years and possibly kicking off a 1,000-year-long cooling episode prepared to happen in the climate anyways. Genetic evidence shows that around 70,000 years ago, human populations sharply decreased to 3,000 to 10,000 surviving individuals. We'd expect to see this in animal species too, and we indeed observe genetic bottlenecks in other animals in the wake of the youngest Toba eruption. The populations of Eastern African chimpanzee, Bornean orangutan, Central Indian macaw, cheetah, and tiger all recovered from very small populations around 70 to 55,000 years ago. The second event takes place much closer to today than many people realize. Between the end of the last ice age to the early Holocene, roughly 19 to 11,000 years ago, the climate system experienced drastic transformation. the most likely cause of which we refer to as the Younger Dryas hypothesis. Just look at how much more land was visible when global sea levels were nearly 400 feet lower around 18,000 years ago. Surprised? Well, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis claims that around 12,000 years ago, multiple fragments of a comet hit the North American ice cap in Greenland, initiating the collapse of Lake Agassiz, a tremendously massive glacier ice dam. And when all this fresh water entered the North Atlantic, it disrupted the ocean's conveyor belt. Warm seawater couldn't move north towards the Arctic, and temperatures across the northern hemisphere apparently plunged, triggering what scientists call the Big Freeze, the last major cold age on Earth. North America saw the extinction of 38 genera of mostly large mammals, and the vanishing of the early Clovis culture, which existed at the time. We were told that humans hunted large animals to extinction, but the evidence shows that megafauna like mammoths, mastodons, and saber-toothed tigers all disappeared at the same time. There are scars of an ancient massive flood and shorelines in North American mountains as water flowed out over the years. Significant levels of platinum, nanodiamonds, and nuclear glass created at temperatures only comets and nukes produce at 3,000 to 4,000 degrees show up in sediments across several continents at this time. The 31-kilometer wide crater found in Greenland's Huaytha Glacier in 2018 has been dated to around the same time period and is a likely candidate for one of the meteors involved in the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. And finally, the Great Flood story is not only in the Abrahamic religions, but it also can be found in some of the Indian scriptures as well. But essentially, the signs of civilization that we see emerging in this time seem to not be the beginnings of civilization, but rather a restarting civilization that existed before the cataclysm. We still need to approach this problem from more perspectives and with more evidence to understand what caused this extraordinary event. It's the very end of the Ice Age and the Stone Age, and we suddenly see signs of civilization appearing in places like Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, an archaeological discovery which could profoundly change our understanding of the development of the crucial stages in human society. Basically, it remains unknown how a population was large enough to construct, change, and maintain such a substantial complex, and how everyone was organized, paid, and fed in what was supposed to be a pre-sedentary society. There's more cause to feel that humanity has been advanced for a lot longer than we give ourselves credit for. Sophisticated understandings of math and physics appear in the bronze celestial calculator found in a sunk Viking ship. The construction of the Great Pyramids, including the Great Pyramid's King's Chamber, roofed and floored with hundreds of 70-ton granite beams. More could be discovered in the 5.5 million square kilometers of the Amazon, or the Sahara Desert, which used to be green in the Ice Age with a completely different climate. And finally, under the ocean's continental shelves. In prehistoric times, knowledge and techniques were told and retold, elaborated and embroidered from a generation to generation, primarily through oral traditions instead of writing. For instance, the domestication of maize for agriculture has been dated to around 9,000 years ago in southern Mexico. These oral traditions, though, would often face the larger questions regarding our place in the world, the ideal person, or what exactly life and death is about. These myths involved gods of enormous power, engaged in tremendous feats of creation, and often quarreling with one another over goddesses of unspeakable beauty, or intervening in human life for good or ill. These were taught to children as the plain facts of life, often based on the simple authority of how old these myths were, and reinforced by how everyone else seemed to accept them. But a change was slowly occurring. Beginning around 3000 BC, ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia developed the studies of math, astronomy, medicine, and chemical properties. India would lay some of the first writings on politics and grammar, and China began to specialize in new inventions. This knowledge from ancient societies began to pry open the door of myth, which eventually blew wide open with Greek natural philosophy in 600 BC. These were the first formal attempts to explain the physical world.
The scientist is giving an account of the world. He is assimilating things that we don't know, patterns that we don't understand, to patterns that we do understand. That if we can interpret the unknown in terms of the known, if we can describe what is going on in the world in regular patterns, we can predict what things are going to do next.
Philosophy, literally meaning love of wisdom, begins when humans start to ask, although we've been told this since we were children, why should we believe these myths? How do we know they're true? So philosophers try to give us good reasons for believing one thing or another about these matters, or reasons to be skeptical. This conflict is epitomized in the execution of Socrates by his fellow Athenians, as he didn't believe in the city's gods, so he was accused of corrupting the young people of Athens as a philosopher. The Greek Empire was ended by the Romans in 146 BC. Knowledge of Greek philosophy deteriorated during the early centuries of the Middle Ages. But this knowledge would be preserved in monasteries until the development of medieval universities in the 12th century. However, Eastern Rome, otherwise known as the Byzantine Empire, was able to stay intact, holding learning centers such as Constantinople, Alexandria, and Antioch. They helped put together a collection of known mathematics while developing physics. The first record of separating conjoined twins took place in the Byzantine Empire in the 900s. The next recorded case of separating conjoined twins, though, was several centuries later in 1600s Germany. The Islamic Golden Age took place from the 8th to 14th century, when Islam was the keeper of scientific knowledge during Europe's Dark Ages. Their superior military technology had conquered huge swaths of land, creating a vast Ottoman Empire. Here, at Baghdad's House of Wisdom Madrasa, medieval scholars preserved ancient Greek, Persian, and Sanskrit texts, building upon many new branches of science. Specifically, Al-Haytham's optics and other Arabic texts were hugely important for the early European thinkers of the Renaissance. They placed a particular focus on an idea borrowed from the Greek natural philosophers, which would eventually give birth to the scientific revolution in democratic countries that we live in today. Specifically, that each of us is in an immediate relationship with nature. The Islamic Mutazilites felt that God not only spoke through the Quran, but through the book of nature. So by methodically experimenting with nature, we can gain clues to God's nature and desires. When it came to the Quran, Mutazilites believed that the ultimate path of life was towards a true knowledge of God. So, the foundation of God's actions must be ultimately based on reason and justice. Their analysis of religious texts was based on solid logic, rejecting discrepancies where these doctrines conflicted with proven scientific observations. As we finish, it should be pointed out that knowledge of scientific advancements generally weren't shared with the poor populations who resided in these countries. Literacy rates in the ancient world were very low, and less than 10% of the population would have probably been able to read and write. And generally speaking, it was the population of males who were free and came from wealthier families who were likely to receive an education. There are exceptions, like the Islamic Golden Age in ancient Sparta, where both boys and girls both received official education. In Sparta, it was more gendered with less access to reading for women, but the Islamic Golden Age offered women a better education and closer familiarity with the important texts of the time. Many became recognized scholars in their own right. The lack of access to knowledge led to preserving the social castes of the day. But something is changing. Technology has allowed a collection of knowledge much more vast than even the Library of Alexandria to exist on any device connected to the internet.
You don't need college to learn stuff, okay? Everything is available basically for free. You can learn anything you want for free. It is not a question of learning.
Conclusion. The missing gap in our early history redefines how fortunate we are to have this opportunity to use so many tools to heal the world. Our story continues because of how hard our ancestors worked to survive and give us this chance. We've also seen a glimpse of the conflict rising to meet early scientific achievements, specifically with authority. While it's true that science is indeed its own authority to contend with, science bases its authority in freedom, reason, discipline, and actually faith, as we'll see. It is truly anti-authoritarian. Science chose every one of us, in fact, all of life, to receive the gift of understanding. And what we do with it is up to us. In order to begin uncovering some of these solutions, and in order to really think critically about how to use science in facing our shared global challenges, it's imperative we achieve a good understanding of how science got to where it is today, to see the sources which the pain is coming from. Our next video will dive deeper into this conflict between authority and scientific anti-authority, and takes us to the beginning of the medieval Middle Ages. Thank you.